What I tell people to do is take all the things in your life that are wrong and that aren't working and assign blame to them. You know, I'm fat. Who's at fault? Sarah Lee, all right, or somebody like that. And I'm broke, and that's the Dow Jones's fault, or it's the Ayatollah's fault, or it's somebody else's fault. You place the blame there, and now look at your life and see if it's any different. See if it's improved in any way. And you find that blame or fault finding doesn't do anything except make the victimizer one more step ahead of you in the game. All right, let's look at a few strategies here for stopping yourself from being victimized by references to the past. When someone starts telling you things that they've always been a certain way and we've always done things this way, you could respond very nicely with, would you like to know if I care about what you're telling me right now? Or, do you think that what you're telling me right now is relevant? Do you believe that how we did it last Thursday or last year is really the issue here? It's like you confront it right away, and as soon as you get that, you disarm the potential victimizer. Try to eliminate the should-haves from your own life and from your own conversations, your own vocabulary. Try to get that word what you should have, would have, or could have, sort of, woulda, coulda, out of your life. And understand that all of that is just a reference to keep you from being effective today. And it's just nothing but a blame assigner. And so don't use it yourself, and you'll find yourself not. And you'll find yourself flagging it real fast when other people use it on you as well. If someone asks you why you did something, give a very brief 1 or 2 sentence response, and that's it. And don't keep going on and over-explaining it. Because the more you over-explain, the more you're going to find yourself victimized by them. Don't be afraid to admit that you're wrong when you do something, or just simply say, you're right, you've made a very good point, and I will learn from that, and I won't do it in the future. This is one of the great things that my wife and I are able to do with each other over and over again. Instead of having these arguments that are endless, it's like you stop yourself right in the middle and you say, you know, you're right. You made a good point. I was a jerk. I behaved stupidly, and I'm going to see if I don't do that. It stops. I mean, I've seen my wife have her mouth fall almost onto the floor when I've just turned around and stopped being pushy about it and admitted, yeah, you've made a good point. And usually the person doing the most talking is the one that's wrong. Try to learn from the past rather than repeating it and making references to it all the time. And silently forgive all of the people in your life who you feel have victimized you in some way. That's such an important lesson to learn. Forgiveness, all of those people who behaved towards you in the past that you might still be hanging on to today. The ex-spouse, the child that doesn't call, the person who borrowed money from you who hasn't repaid it, the parent or the grandparent who ignored you or abused you in some way. That forgiveness is a very, very powerful tool. All of the spiritual masters who've ever come our way, including, of course, Christ on the cross. When someone threw a spear and a soldier threw a spear into him, his first words were, "Forgive them, for he knows not what he does." That's such an important concept to get. The reason that Christ was saying he knows not what he does is because he was really saying that when you throw a spear into me, you throw a spear into yourself, because we're all connected, we're all one. And the same thing is true for all the people who have thrown spears into you, if you will, or harmed you in some way. It's like a snake bite. If a snake comes along and bites you, no one ever died from a snake bite. The bite is just a bite. It's just a wound that's on, and you can't unbind a snake. You can't untie it. What kills you is the venom that is pouring through your system and destroying you. The metaphor there is that what is destructive to you in this whole business of not being victimized by what is over is the venom, which is your thoughts that you carry around. The behavior is done. You can't undo it. You can't change it. You can't get it. You can't unabandon someone. You can't not abandon them now. Well, if you already did, you can't repay the money that you never repaid. I mean that. That's all done. That's all. You didn't do it. That's over with. But what you can do now is just decide not to carry that around, not to let their behavior destroy you. Mark Twain put it this way. He said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. You have to know how to do that, because once you let it go and get rid of it, I can remember someone was trying to sue me at one time over some silly little thing, and I was angry and filled with rage about it, and going to really show them that they couldn't do it. And once I let it go, and once I sent forgiveness out, then send love where I was sending hate before. I lost the food, was dropped, and I have all of the things that I worried about so much just, melted away. The same thing will happen with so much of the victimizing that you do. Get forgiveness into your heart, and you'll find yourself a whole lot better off and not being victimized by all that stuff that happened years and years and years ago. That isn't worth hanging on to anyway. Pulling your own strings. Another common way that people pull your strings instead of you pulling them yourself is this whole business of what I call the comparison trap. In a world of individuals, comparison is a senseless activity. You are unique in all the world. No one can get behind your eyeballs and be you. No one can experience you. The only thing that anyone can experience you with is their mind. Everything else is a step removed. Their thoughts are what they have to experience you with, and so too do you experience everyone else with your thoughts. Otherwise, you are experiencing existential aloneness. Existential aloneness is really very different than loneliness. See, loneliness is experienced when you don't like the person you're alone with. But aloneness, it's just in the way of things. You can be in a crowd at the largest stadium in the world, surrounded by 100,000 screaming people, and you experience it uniquely. No one can get behind your eyeballs and inside your ears and experience it and hear it the way you hear. Your red, that you see the color red, is your red. It can't be mine. You can't see it the way I see it. This is a very important mental concept to get to avoid being victimized by other people, because as you'll see in just a moment, there are people out there who would compare you all the time and use this as a way of controlling and manipulating and getting you to be them, to behave in the ways that they want you to behave. When you understand your existential aloneness, when you know that you are unique and special in all the world, then you stop the inclination to compare yourself to other people. You stop constantly telling yourself that you have to be like others. You stop constantly striving to accomplish and achieve at the same level that other people have achieved. You get past this whole need to keep up with the Joneses, because that's a way of putting yourself into a victim trap. It's almost impossible to get out of it. You see, even if you're in a race with somebody else, if you're looking over your shoulder to see how you're doing in comparison to how the other person is doing, then what you're really doing at that moment is saying that you are in charge of how I am feeling right now. However you perform in comparison to me is what makes me happy or not happy. You've turned the strings over to somebody else. This is a really big area for most people. Most people find themselves unable to isolate themselves from comparing themselves to other people. Children grow up in a world where they hear things about peer pressure all the time. There's a lot of peer pressure that everybody has to fit in. And if you don't fit in, then you're isolated. If you're isolated, then you're a reject. And if you're a reject, then you're an outcast. It all goes on to all of these horrible labels that we place on people. We have to raise children to understand that there's no peer pressure in the world. There are people out there who are saying, do things the way I do them. And then there are individuals who say, I've got a mind of my own. You want your children to have a mind of their own. You too want to have a mind of your own. You want to think for yourself. You don't want to have somebody telling you constantly that you have to do it because everybody else does it. If you do things the way everybody else does, what have you got to offer? If you're just like everybody else, you have nothing to offer. You're just one more sheep bleeding away. You don't want to be that way. You want to understand that, yes, there are standards and there are norms within a society, and that we accept those as living standards. But I don't compare myself to other people. I don't have to go out into the world and look at other people to determine how I'm doing in my life. That's got to be an inner thing. That's something that has to come from within. Yet there are people out there, many of them, who are going to constantly compare you and use all kinds of techniques and strategies to get you to conform by saying, don't you see that other people are doing that? The first thing you have to do before you can even eliminate other people doing it to you is to get rid of it yourself. Get rid of this whole notion that I have to be somebody who other people accept, or like in order for me to feel good. You don't want your children to be believing that, well, everybody else does drugs, so that's why I did it. Or everybody else is jumping off the cliff, so that's why I jumped. Everybody else is drinking and driving, so that's why I do it. Or everybody else is not wearing any clothes to school, so that's why I go naked. I mean, it's an absurdity. If you're constantly comparing them to others, then don't be surprised when they do it themselves. Raise them to understand that, yes, there are peers out there who will try to pressure you. But if you buy into it, then you are the victim. You have to decide for yourself what is morally proper, what works and doesn't work, and what is effective and ineffective, and not some invisible standard called peer pressure. That is the biggest cop-out I've ever heard of. Let's look at some of the victim traps in this comparison business. Here's the first one. Why aren't you more like your brother? Or why aren't you more like your sister? Or why aren't you more like Sally down the street? you find when somebody else is telling you to look at yourself.